All right, SNMP with extreme switches. Let's just get right into it. Today we're going to be looking at SNMP um, version 2, and we're also going to be looking at SNMP version 3 and how to set those up on the extreme switches. I'm also going to show you the delete commands, how to get those out of there, because sometimes it can be a little funky on what exactly you need for it. So let's log in here to our switch, and we'll just start configuring. The first thing to keep in mind is that on the extreme switches, the host name is actually controlled by the SNMP. So if you want to set the host name, you need to configure that by setting the SNMP sysname, and then we'll just say switch 1. As you can see, that's going to change it from what it used to be to our new switch name. You can also see this .1 after that. So that is how many commands you've actually entered into the switch. So you can see I can hit enter. It's not doing anything. But as soon as I, change this and enter a command, it's going to increment that to be a different line of code. Anyway, let's continue. So here we're going to be working on version 2 first off. With Extreme, they do it in a funky way where you're actually, it looks like you're setting up SNMP version 3, even if you're setting up SNMP version 2, but they just are using the SNMP v3 name as a default. I'm guessing that they're thinking that SNMP version 2 is going to go away at some point, and so they just decided to use SNMP v3 for all of its beginning names. So if we do a configure SNMP v3 add the community name, SNMP v3 add community. We're just going to say this is a public name. Public. And then for the user, we'll say user v2. We'll say it's a read user. Hit enter. And then we have to set up, let's say we'll do a private one as well. So there's going to be something that's going to be using read and write access. So we'll do SNMP v3 add community private. The name will have it be private. User, we'll say it's user v2 right. Okay. And then we have to set up a group for these. So we can say configure SNMP v3 add group. I'll say SNMP v2 group, something like that. We'll say notify group. And then we'll say the user is going to be our first user, so it'll be our read-only user, v2ro. And then you have to set up your version that you're using. So you say sec-model, and then this will give you your different options. So you can do v1, v2, or USM, which is your v3. So we are going to be using SNMP v2, and hit enter. And then once you get that all configured, the last thing you'll need to do is enable SNMP version 2. So we'll do a enable SNMP and enable SNMP. And then we will say access SNMP. And then you can see v1 and v2 are together and v3 is separate. SNMP-v1. Enter. So once you have that all in there, that should be what you need for your SNMP for version 2. You can do a show config SNMP, and that'll give you all of the SNMP commands that you typed in. Here we can see that SNMP3 is enabled, but we can disable that, or it's disabled. But if we want to enable that here in a second, so we can set up v3, we will do that. So let's do that now. We can do enable SNMP access SNMP v3. Okay, so we have that turned on. Now let's go ahead and set up our v3 users. We'll say v3 read authentication. We're going to set up our authentication method. We're going to use MD5. You can also use SHA. Our password, SNMP read. And then we have to set up a privacy key. You can have a couple different methods. You can do 3DS, AES, DES, hex. I've always used DES. And then you have your secret password. We're just going to say secret password. This last string here has to be more than 6 characters, I believe. So if you're getting an error where it's really short, that's probably why. Actually, I think it has to be between 6 and 15, I believe. Let's try, see what we get here. Oh yeah, 49. So 7 and 49 characters. So if you get an error, that's just probably why you have to change the secret. So it's in between 7 and 49. Secret pass. Okay, there we go. And then let's set up a group for that user. Configure SNMP v3, add group v3 SNMP read, keep it simple, user. So for this user, it has to be the exact same user that you set up here. So we're going to be using v3 read, and then we have to set up our model. This is going to be version 3, so we're going to say USM and then hit enter. And then we have to set up our access roles for this. So we'll set this up, access v3 SNMP v read. I always have the group and the access the access name be the same. And then we will do the model. Make sure we are using USM for the same model. And then we need to set the privilege level for the read only. So let's do sec level private and then read view. We're just going to have that be a default view. And this name can be whatever you want. If you go back, you can see you can actually enter in whatever name you want it to be. I always just say default view. Do we want it to be a write view? We'll say none. And then notify. We're just going to have it be that same default view. I'll go into this a little bit more into this when we get down to allowing our MIBs. You can actually set access to the MIBs that you want for these. So if you had your read view set up, you could have your read view allow only certain MIBs. You could have your write view only allow certain MIBs as well, so they could only edit a certain subset of those. We'll get into that just a little bit later. So we hit enter on that. Now we need to hit our target parameters. Configure SNMP v3, add target params. I'll say this is going to be a network team. User, we're going to use that same user. v3 read. MP model. We're going to use SNMP v3. And then sec USM. And then sec level. We're going to use private. So that's when you say private, that means it's going to be, it needs the private key, and it also needs that the secret key as well. So it's like a 2-factor authentication. You can have it just do a no auth, meaning that you don't need any authentication to get in there, or you can just have it be the auth password and not the privacy password. If you want to make it the most secure, do the priv, and that'll pretty much be a 2-factor authentication. You have to have both those passwords. Also with this, this is setting up like your traps, your traps and your informs. So an inform message will be the switch reaching out to your server sending the response, and then the server responding back to your switch saying, hey, I got that message. I was informed of this message, that I got it, and I'm sending you back a reply. If you just want it to be a trap will just send the information, whatever log messages that it's sending out. It'll send that trap out, not looking for a response at all. So you don't know if that message really got there or not. We're going to set up kind of both of them here, but just to kind of give you a heads up on that. So once we hit up our target parameters, now we're going to set up, say, our trap, configure SNMP v3, add, notify v3v, and then tag it. We're just going to say trap sync. I always think of that trap is just going to a sink. It's just you're just pouring all the information into a sink, and so that's just gonna send it all through. It's just gonna go down the drain and go to your server. That's kind of how I think of it. And then we need to enable SNMP3. I think we already did that. Show config SNMP3. Yep, SNMP3 is already enabled. So then we also need to set this up. If you have different VRs, you can actually set that up to go out a different VR if you wanted. If you wanted to go out like your management VR or your default, usually we just send it out the default, which is fine, but you can send it out the management port, and that will reflect their SNMP. I think that the default is that it's going to be sent out through your default VR default, but you can send that up through your management interface. And then let's say that you want to actually send traps to a specific server or informs, if you want to set that up. So to do that, you would set up SNMP and then add trap receiver, set your server that your traps are going to be sent to, and then you would use your community name, so user v2 ro, and then you'd also want to tell it which VR you're sending it out, default, and then if you want to send it out a specific port, you can do that too. There's that. Okay, so if you want to limit which information is get read from the MIBs, we can set that with our MIB view. So here's the command that you do that. To do that, say configure SNMP v3, add MIB view, and then you would use the user group that is viewing that. So in our case, that's SNMP or v3 SNMP read, and then the subtree that you want. So I'm just going to throw this out here. 1.1 F8. I'm not sure what that is exactly, but that would be like the MIB walk going down. You could probably figure this out if you went down this path, figure out what that was, and then we're going to include that. If you wanted to exclude that, so you didn't want that information to be sent off, you could say exclude, and so the MIBs would not send that information. And say, are you sure you want to modify this? Yes, I'm sure. So then if you want to see all your SNMP commands within the switch, you just do a show configuration SNMP, and this will give you all of the information that you had configuring SNMP version 1 and version 2, version 3, all that good stuff. You'll see the commands, some of the commands that we typed in don't really reflect exactly how they got typed in. You can see this notify group, kind of looks a little bit funky. That's just the switch kind of changing the information a little bit to make it more readable for the switch itself. So here the target address, that's not the actual command. We typed it in. We just typed in our command, but it kind of dumped in these other parameters in here. Now, if you want to delete SNMP lines of code from your switch, we're going to do a configure SNMP v3 delete, and then if we're going to delete the user, we'll do a delete user v3 read. It'll delete that. I'm just going to do one of each instead of going through all of them. If you want to delete the group, it's the same thing. Use the delete command and then your group, and then you'd find v1, v2, c notify group. And then you also have to have the user as well. v1, v2, c notify user 1. And it'll delete that. Let's say you want to delete the access. Figure out delete access v3 SNMP read. Delete that. The MIB view. Okay. And then the community, I don't know if do we have, yeah, we do have community. Configure SNMP v3, delete community, and then private. And then let's say we want to get rid of the target parameters. Configure SNMP v3, delete target parameters, network team. That'd be how you delete it. So hopefully this is helpful for you. If it was, give it a like, give it a follow. We'll see you again. Thank you.